10 years ago, this section of Lynn was devastated by a fire of enormous proportions. It started in a vacant factory building which was about to be demolished and spread quickly to a group of loft buildings. Before the fire could be brought under control and finally extinguished, 18 industrial buildings had been totally destroyed and 8 other structures were heavily damaged. On Saturday, November 28, 1981, it took over 700 firefighters, utilizing 95 engines, 29 ladders, and 2 rescue companies to extinguish the inferno. Joseph Scanlon Jr. was Lynn Fire Chief at the time. Now retired, he recalls arriving at the site.
By the time I got there, which was about 7 minutes, I have reason to believe it was exactly 7 minutes from the initial alarm, it was evident it was out of control.
And then what do you do?
You just have to set up your perimeter defense, try to hold it, and keep marshaling more men and equipment to confine it. The first firefighter we ever saw around, they came from Lexington that morning. She was home in the Lexington engines. But there were 700 firefighters there.
How far, as far as Lexington?
It came from 80 community, went as far north as Amesbury, over to Salem, New Hampshire, Methuen, Lawrence, Lowell, down through Merrimack Valley, out as far as Concord, Lexington, and Framingham, and down south to Walpole, Brockton, with the exception of Quincy, because they had a fire going at the same time, and the exception of Drake and Raleigh. There were no individual homes destroyed, but there were about 400 to 450 residents lost their homes because of fire in those high rises. There were 3 high rises for elderly people affected. There were 500 jobs lost. There was $153,500 in taxable money lost to the city of Lynn that year alone. The fire loss was settled at about $70 million and another $10 million in direct loss. That was tremendous loss to the city of Lynn. There was one building called the Daily Drug Building, and there were elderly people in there, high-rise, 8 stories. And at 2:30 in the morning, they were evacuated out the back door. Now, to be woken up at 2:30 in the morning told to get out, let alone old people, getting out a back door they weren't used to. They'd only been in there a short time. There's no panic. No, sure, there were anxious moments and so forth. There's no panic. Yeah. Fire started at 2:35 in the morning. It wasn't declared under control until 5:15 in the afternoon. And we remained on the scene for another 4 or 5 days afterwards.
Under control, that doesn't necessarily mean it was out.
Oh, no, it just meant that we had, at that time, judged that it wasn't going to spread any further. And we were handicapped, but about 2 days later, we had a heavy snowstorm. And everybody said, that'll help. But to put a blanket of snow on top of the ruins and allowed the oxygen underneath to feed onto the fire. We couldn't get at the fire. So what were the basements and sub-basements of those buildings were burning for days.
And there was nothing you could do about it?
No, the snow was on there, yeah. Wow. They weren't going anyplace, but still it was burning.
So it actually took a few days?
Oh, yes, yes. Unfortunately, the city was plagued with a numerous amount of very suspicious fires for about 2 weeks after that. It sort of brought the
immediately after?
Sort of brought the kooks out of the woodwork. Till the second week in December, we had a very serious 9-alarm fire in a plastic plant where one man was killed. An occupant was killed, and then it seemed to just stop then. There were 26 7- and 8-story buildings completely destroyed, and 4 or 5 8-story buildings 50 to 100% destroyed. It was all within a small confined area, but still at the height of the building, the size of the building, tremendous. Those buildings all, well, not all, but 90% of them had sprinkler systems, but you have to remember those buildings were erected following the Great Lynn Fire of 1889. The codes weren't as they are now. The sprinkler system's operated, but a sprinkler system is designed to extinguish a single fire on a single floor, not an entire building worth of fire. And we could ordinarily augment the sprinkler system by pumping water into them. But the sprinkler connections for most of those buildings were either obstructed by the heat of the fire and the falling walls, or they were located in the rear of the building where we couldn't get at them. The codes are different today. They could be utilized. So, in essence, when the pipes broke as the floors collapsed and the water rushed out, the sprinkler system acted as a deterrent to us because the water was just bubbling out and we couldn't use it from the hydrants.
Yeah.
We had plenty of water, but pressure was a big problem for us, see. It was estimated by Jack Casey, the then DPW commissioner, that there was over 51 million of gallons of water used, in addition to what was drafted from the Atlantic Ocean. I can't praise the firefighters from Lynn, and all over, every one of the 700 people that came, and the other 64 that stood by in stations covering the city from other areas. They were very good. During the height of this fire, no, I beg your pardon, it was a few hours later, right after the fire was declared under control, but we still had all the Lynn equipment there. We had a serious fire not connected with this, up in the Highlands. It was handled all by firefighters from out of the community that didn't know anything about Lynn. They had to be directed to the area. And I think that speaks very highly for the professional firefighters, the way they were able to handle that.
Quite scary, yeah. One of the things I remember on the Marshall's Wharf building, the 8-story building, when the walls come down, there were a lot of spectators there, and they all applauded when the walls come down, and I thought that was kind of strange. Yeah, it was scary, actually. Yeah, but,
Deputy Fire Chief Bill Conway was second in command at the time of the fire. He, like Joe Scanlon, felt the unity of the firefighters as they battled the raging blaze.
It was difficult in the sense that it was out of control. There wasn't much we could do about it. We tried to contain it, but we couldn't. It was just overpowering. And we finally got plenty of help in there, and the guys did a nice job. There was departments from all over the state, and actually part of Rhode Island and New Hampshire, too. Guys who had never seen each other working shoulder to shoulder in a major fire like this. I talked to one fellow in the ramp building that said he never even knew where Lynn was. And there he was inside the building fighting the fire there. So firefighters are a different breed. They're very close. It's a very proud profession. I mean, the guys do a good job and they're proud of it. It was kind of scary, though, again, the extent of the fire, the volume of fire, and it was out of control for so long. But we did a good job, considering what we had to work with and the type of buildings down there, the height and the way they were collapsing, the water supply and everything. All in all, we did a good job. The biggest thing was the way the guys worked. To work shoulder to shoulder. I mean, guys we never even met before were working right with us. The guys in the department were excellent. There was very few injuries. We had a couple of fractures, minor fractures at that, but that was the only injuries we had. But the guys just seemed to get together. It was a common goal. They all did a good job, and we all stood proud after the fire.
No injuries?
Very minor injuries. Say there was a fellow from Georgetown that had a fractured ankle. I think somebody else had a fractured wrist. There were only 2 minor injuries, considering the volume of fire and the buildings collapsing and all. It was miraculous. The fire came in about 2:30 in the morning. About 6 o'clock that next afternoon, the fire was under control. In other words, we had a control, but we still had an awful lot of overhauling. Our men were on the scene for probably about 4 or 5 days afterwards. The day after the fire, we started a task force to investigate the cause of the fire, and I was involved with that part of it.
I mean, when do things actually get back to normal? How long does that take?
It was never back to normal. We lost a lot of equipment. We had 3 engines who were never to be used again because of this destruction, the wear and tear, and they were old to start with. Again, the whole section of the city is a big void down there for us. So we never really got back to normal, but probably within 2 or 3 weeks after that, we were back to the best we could be, close to normal as possible. The powers to be come up with a figure of $70 million as far as property loss goes, the contents of the buildings and the buildings themselves. There were other related expenses and losses, loss of jobs and stuff like that, welfare and aid and stuff like that. So they probably figure close to $80 million. You're pretty limited to what you're seeing when you're working the fire. You're in one small area, and you really don't know the overall picture of how much damage there is until after the smoke clears. I mean, it sounds corny, but it is actually smoke. After the smoke clears, you see what you have there, and you say, oh my God, look at this. But the problem was the fire was so helpless. There wasn't that much we could do about this. The height of these buildings, most of them are 8 stories in height, and they were just dropping and falling, and there's debris, and it was kind of a helpless feeling. You just try to stop the fire, and eventually we did. We did an investigation. The building the fire started in was vacant at the time. It was in the process of being torn down. About 30 feet from the rear of the building was already gone. So there was no power in the building, no lights, no electricity, no heat, nothing like that. Nothing would cause a fire. So I was in charge of the on-scene investigation part of it, and I feel the fire was set. We never could prove it, but I did feel it was set. I testified in the United States District Court of a man who was questioned about the fire, who lied under oath, and he in turn served 3 years in a state prison for it. So that's the only arrest we had in the fire.
What does 3 years do to all the damage?
Well, again, I think whoever set this fire never intended to be that much damage. They just wanted that one building down.
Good evening, this is John Fisher, and tonight Warner Amex News takes a look at some scenes from the Great Lynn Fire. 72 hours after the first alarm sounded early Saturday morning, the fire is still smoldering, serving as a grim reminder to what has become known as the Great Lynn Fire. Arson is suspected in the blaze, which caused an estimated $35 to $70 million in damage, leaving over 100 families homeless and as many as 1,500 people unemployed. By late Saturday afternoon, fire apparatus from over 80 communities in Massachusetts and New Hampshire had arrived on the scene, along with countless other Red Cross and emergency medical volunteers. According to witnesses, the first flames were spotted from the Hutchinson Wharf building on Broad Street, approximately 2:30 Saturday morning. Lynn Police Detective William Foley was the first to arrive at the scene of the blaze. Foley said the front of the bottom floor was engulfed in flames when he arrived. His first impression was that the fire was extinguishable, but minutes later he realized the situation was indeed more serious. Flying sparks quickly ignited the adjacent Leisure Towers, a 179-unit apartment building for the elderly. Immediate evacuation of the elderly commenced. The fire quickly swept through the city's historic business district, destroying 17 buildings before it was brought under control 15 hours later. Many of the floors of the old mill buildings in the Shoe District were soaked with oil and other solvents from years of industrial use. The job of the 600 firefighters who battled the blaze was further complicated by gale winds, which reached firestorm proportions, creating hurricane-force gales. Firefighters continued to extinguish the blaze by pumping salt water from the Atlantic Ocean on the hot spots that were still smoldering through the gutted factories. 6 firefighters, 2 evacuated women, 1 spectator, and a police officer were brought to nearby hospitals and treated. The most seriously injured firefighters were 2 firemen from Billerica and Georgetown, who were treated for various leg and ankle fractures. Both were injured when a sidewall of the Benson Shoe Company collapsed and fell on the roof of an auto body shop with the men inside. According to Captain Donald Osmond of the Lynn Salvation Army, some 250 people who were left homeless by the blaze were relocated with family or friends by Saturday evening. This evening, a final toll of the damage has been taken. Out of the 27 buildings which had caught fire, 17 have been completely destroyed, leveling $35 million worth of real estate over a 5-square-block area. State Representative Timothy Bassett of Lynn said that up to another $35 million could have been lost in smoke damage, factory equipment, and other possessions consumed in the blaze. An estimated 1,500 people are unemployed as of this morning. Yesterday, Lynn and state officials began taking the first steps in what will be a monumental effort to rebuild the gutted area. Mayor Marino, Governor King, Senator Kennedy, and Paul Tsongas, and Congressman Nicholas Marvulis toured the fire area Sunday and promised to do everything they can to help the city. At a press conference Sunday afternoon, Mayor Marino vowed at a jammed City Hall meeting to re-begin the nearly finished 5-year downtown renovation project. Governor King said that he would go to Washington if necessary to push for the delivery of the presidential disaster declaration. At Sunday's meeting, dozens of federal, state, and local officials were present, along with many of the local businessmen whose buildings were either destroyed or damaged by the massive blaze. As of last night, Mayor Marino had planned a meeting scheduled for this morning with State Senator Walter Boverini. The 2 men plan to discuss the effect of the fire will have on the plans for the new North Shore Community College, which was slated to be built in the gutted area. Later this morning, Mayor Marino also was to have met with Tsongas, Kennedy, and Marvulis for a further briefing and consultation. State Commissioner of Unemployment Eugene Duty said the 1,500 employees left unemployed by the blaze could file this week for claims which could total $6 million over the next 6 months. As Mayor Marino and officials discussed the future of the area, work crews using 3 100-foot wrecking cranes began knocking down the fragile factory walls which were left standing, looming above the smoldering brick and rubble. By the day's end, a half-dozen walls had been demolished. A force of 230 National Guardsmen from the Salem Armory stood in front of the estimated 1,000 onlookers yesterday. As of today, the Guardsmen are still here, patrolling the streets. Essex County District Attorney Kevin Burke and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are offering at least a $1,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of a suspect in connection with this fire. As for the future and the task of rebuilding the devastated area, maybe it's best surmised by the words of Lynn Mayor Marino. We did it before, and we'll do it again. Local community groups such as Lynn's Economic Opportunity are starting programs for the fire victims. The Leo's East Lynn office at 73 Union Street is open for permanent relocation of the fire victims. Landlords with available apartments are asked to please call 599-9308. That's 599-9308. If you're a landlord with available apartments, please call for permanent relocation of fire victims. Also, there is a fire disaster fund being sponsored by the Great Lynn chapter of the American Red Cross at 73 North Common Street in Lynn. If you'd like to make donations to help the fire victims, send your check to 73 North Common Street in Lynn, or for more information, call 592-9660, I believe. We'll check on that number and make sure that's right. The Red Cross has also opened a service center at St. Mary's Church. The drop-in center is open 9 to 5 daily, and they're available to help assist people put out by the fire, to help them relocate and provide needed clothing or food or whatever the need be. If there's anything that you can do to help with this great disaster, please call the Red Cross. We'll check on that number, and I believe it's 592-6660. That's 592-6660. As everyone's aware, there were quite a few companies that suffered fire losses at this fire. City officials are still working to compile a full list of the companies. So far here at Warner News, we have Allen Signs of Lynn, Walter Dyer Leather, and Colonial Wood Heel at 244 Broad Street. Valiant Industries Incorporated, Dysky and Magnetics and High Dye Electric Coating Company at 669 Washington Street. A&M Paper Converting Sales at 685 Washington Street. John Morris Used Furniture, Atwell Furniture, J&R Surplus, and Harold Roberts at 703 Washington Street. Bay State Express Company, 13 Blanchard Road. Oxford Hopkins, Elliott Morse Company, and Colonial Bag. And Northeast Cutting Die at 278 Broad Street. Benson Shoe Company, 190 Broad Street. Kevin's Cutright, 703 Washington Street. Ballot, 669 Washington Street. Champion Dye at 210 Broad Street. La Rosa Lunch, 714 Washington Street. Carofilio Woodwork, 27 Farrar Street. Crane Safety, 34 Farrar Street. Potter's Pantry Caterers at 724 Washington Street. Acme Auto Glass. Milton Engineering, Cameo Lounge, Glenmere Hub and Dye, Sam's Grill, Olympic Auto, Joe's Barbershop, Elm, Shank and Heel, Goldberg Furniture, and Sterling Machine all suffered fire losses because of this Great Lynn disaster that happened.
where to call to get emergency information for food, clothing, and medicine. The American Red Cross Disaster Service Center at St. Mary's Cardinal Cushing Center, 60 Mount Pleasant Street, at 596-0348. They're giving out vouchers for food, clothing, and medical supplies. They're open 9 to 5, and call 592-6660 after hours. The Salvation Army at 1 Franklin Street at 598-0673. They have a clothing collection center there. And also the Lynn Item at 38 Exchange Street also is a clothing drop-off center. For housing, it's the Lynn Housing Authority at 170 South Common Street, 592-1966, open 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. Public housing placements. Lynn Economic Opportunity Multi-Service Center at 73 Union Street at 599-9308, emergency apartment placements and hotline for landlords with available apartments. They're open 9 to 5 or as needed. An evacuation list. The American Red Cross Disaster Service Center is attempting to compile a list of people evacuated from the fire. Please call them with information of your current address, even if you were moved back into your original place of residence. Call 596-0348. For housing and business relocation, it's Community Development, City Hall, 595-0356. Call hours 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Disaster Relief Fund. Checks for disaster relief should be sent to Lynn Red Cross, Chapter 73 North Common Street in Lynn, 01902. Fire Disaster Fund, the Greater Lynn chapter of the American Red Cross, is sponsoring a fire disaster fund to help victims of the fire. Send donation to Greater Lynn chapter, 73 North Common Street in Lynn, 01902. A fire drop-in center. A service center has been opened at the St. Mary's Church for victims of the fire. The center is open from 9 to 5 daily. Assistance will be provided to fire victims. Sponsored by the Lynn Red Cross. For more information on that service drop-in center, you can call the St. Mary's Cardinal Cushing Center at 60 Pleasant Street at 596-0348. For more information on how you can help, please contact the Greater Lynn chapter of the American Red Cross at 592-6660. And Warner MX Cable expresses their appreciation to all the firemen, policemen, and National Guardsmen that helped with this disaster in Lynn. This has been a Warner MX News presentation.